Hi, welcome to this video where I'm going to talk a little bit more about the outputs phase of an analytics project. The outputs phase is the bit which comes at the end of a project, and this is where we communicate with our client what we've done, and we try and explain to the client the nature of the analysis, and we try and convince the client that what we've done is reliable and that they can have confidence in what we've done. And normally what that means is doing a presentation and writing a report, and we may also be handing over products like Excel spreadsheets and things like that. So what's really important here is that we remember that good projects can go bad in the outputs phase. So analysts, as a rule, tend to focus on the analytics bit of a project, and because that's what they're good at and that's what they enjoy, they tend to spend too much time on the analytics and not enough time on the outputs phase. And so they leave the report right to the last minute and they don't give it enough time, and so the report perhaps isn't as good a quality as it could have been if they'd spent more time on it. So the normal outputs are a final report and a presentation to key stakeholders. So that's normally what happens, and the report and the presentation has to act on two levels. It needs to communicate and sell your project to the organization. Okay, so the logic of your analysis and the robustness of your findings, but it also represents a formal record of the project for their records and for their audit purposes. And the reason I've put sell in there is that it's really important that sometimes I think when you get to the end of a project, you think, well, you know, the organisation, of course, will accept that this project was necessary and it's a good project. But no, you need to remember that people who have not been involved in the project, who don't know what the project was all about, will come to the presentation and they will make up their mind about the quality of the overall project based upon your performance in the presentation. So if you get up and do a lousy presentation, even if your project analysis was really, really good, stakeholders will say, oh, well, that wasn't very good. They're not a very good team. We shouldn't be following these recommendations. I've seen it happen. It's very frustrating when that does happen. So you must sell the project to the stakeholders that come to the presentation. They must be confident in the project team, otherwise the findings won't be implemented. The report might not even be read by some people, and certainly the company's not going to be coming back to you in the future for more consulting work. So, hints and tips for how to be successful. Ensure the outputs phase of your project is jointly designed with the client or with stakeholders from the organization. Okay, they may have priorities for your team which you don't know about. Okay, so you need to remember that there will be political things going on. There are historical forces going on in the company which you as an external analyst might know nothing about, and you need to be sensitive to those things. Ensure the language and focus of your report and presentation are appropriate. Okay, so some organizations like quite technical language, some don't like any technical language. So you need to make sure that you're choosing the right sort of language and that you're focusing on the right sort of things. Leave time in the project plan to complete the outputs phase effectively. Really difficult. We tend to love the analysis phase too much. Try to understand the context of the project so the outputs phase is realistic. Okay, so in your mind you might be thinking that the organization is going to implement some amazing new data science or analytics, but in reality they may be fairly early on in their evolution of the use of analytics and data science, and so you need to sort of try and make sure that your findings are appropriate to that. Remember, good projects can go bad in the outputs phase. We need to make sure that our client is satisfied with our project. So in terms of presentations, the key performance measure is confidence. So at the end of your presentation, the client should be feeling really confident that what you've done is a good piece of work. So make sure you have a clear message. You need to summarize what you've done in a way that makes sense to the client. You need a clear structure. Okay, so it's easy to follow the logic. We did this, then we did this, then we did this. It all makes sense. Remember, clients are not normally analysts, so they don't normally find it easy to follow the details of what you've been doing. You need a clear narrative. So try and create a clear narrative running through the presentation. So at the end of it, people go, yeah, that makes sense. I understand that. Speaking in language, try and tune into the culture of the organisation and the sort of language that they prefer. Reacting and interacting. If you're in a presentation live with a client and you're asked a question, then it can be quite difficult to respond to that when you're presenting because your heart's pumping, you're quite nervous. So what we were always taught in consultancy was, if a question comes in, look across to one of your colleagues, because they'll be in a much better position to answer that question, because they'll be much calmer, they'll be much more able to think about how to deal with that particular question. And use of visuals, only use visuals if they're adding value. Don't just keep chucking things in, putting tables in just because you like creating tables and charts. That's got to be part of the narrative. Now, this notion of confidence is really important. Senior members of staff often will view the presentation, and they may have not been aware of what's happening in the project. So they may have little knowledge of the project before the date of the presentation. They probably won't be able to judge the quality of the analytics as they don't have the expertise. So therefore, they will determine the success of the project based upon how confident they are in you and your team. Okay, so if you're not creating confidence in the stakeholders in the room, then they're gonna start to reject the analytics. So their only way of assessing this may be in the presentation. So they may never have met you before. So it starts to be getting really important. So if the presentation is ineffective, they may dismiss your work. So managers don't really trust analysts. They will make up their own mind whether they will trust you or not. Okay, so and the funny thing is, I remember working with a guy who was a data expert in relation to the NHS, and he was in many ways a terrible presenter, but he always managed to convince the clients that he was an absolute expert in data, because he was. He was very open and honest. So it's not about being super slick and having fantastic PowerPoint slides necessarily. It's about talking with authority about the actual analytics that's been done. Now, having a clear message is not always as easy as you think. One of the most important things is state the obvious. For some reason, analysts find it very difficult to state the obvious simple things, and they go off into the more complicated things, and they forget to state the really obvious things. I think it's because they kind of have some kind of insecurity about people thinking that they haven't done something really sort of amazing, perhaps. I don't know, but make sure that you state the really clear basic findings. Know why the audience has turned up. Most managers want meaning. They don't want to know lots about method and techniques. So they tend to think, so what does this mean to me? What are these people actually saying? And be sensitive to organizational issues. Be strategic about your choice of message and how to deliver it. There may be things going on, political things that you don't know anything about. So make sure that you talk to your client contact about that. Now, when you're writing reports, this will be the basic structure: executive summary, introduction, content, and then summary. All of these elements are really important. Remember that the executive summary is a summary of the whole report. It's not just an introduction. An introduction gives the purpose of the project and the content of the report. And that would be the same for a presentation as well. The content is where you actually just explain what you've done and try and create a nice logical progression. Now, often projects actually are a little bit messy and a bit iterative in practice. People don't need to know everything that happened, so try and create a nice logical flow and help people to follow that by clear signposting. And then at the end of your presentation, remind the audience of what the basic message was, so what does that all mean for the people watching this presentation? So don't be scared to sort of be really clear. Now, with reports, remember there are 3 types of readers. So there's the first type of reader, senior managers. They're only going to read the executive summary. That's it. Okay, so if your executive summary isn't very good or doesn't explain the whole of the project, then you've missed an opportunity to communicate with those people, and they're often the most important people. Now, the second type of reader will be the client and key stakeholders. They will read the executive summary and the main body. Okay, so again, that needs to be complete, needs to make sense. And then reader 3 is the poor technical staff. They have to read everything. They have to read, the main body and the appendices to make sure that the analysis is correct. So remember these 3 different types of readers when you're doing reports, because the report has to work for all of these types of readers. Now, the executive summary is frequently a problem. Most people, most important people only read this. That's why it's called an executive summary. It needs to be an overview of the whole report. Try and get it onto one page. Don't let it get too long. Common mistakes is that it's just an introduction. It's not a summary. It doesn't give the findings and recommendations. It becomes too long and it's missing the point. It's not really capturing the main narrative. Now, when it comes to language and speaking in presentations, try to be clear. Try to put emphasis in your style. Watch how TV presenters speak. They tend to sort of move around quite a lot and animate. That's really useful. Get the tone right. Not too formal, not too authoritative. Educative, yes, perhaps. To try and sort of tune into the culture. I mean, the best way to do that is to talk to the client contact about what you're going to do. Use the appropriate language. And try to connect, try to engage, try to sort of get some kind of rapport going if you can. Now, like I said before, reacting in presentations can be really difficult. When questions come in, it's really hard to deal with them. And it's tempting to become a little bit defensive if you're not careful. So what we were always taught to do, as I said before, is use a team approach. So when a question comes in, look at your team members and hopefully they will help you out. If you don't know what to say, just say, I'm really sorry, but can we come back to that at the end of the presentation? Because if you get too flustered right in the middle, it can be difficult to really, continue with the presentation. And you need to remember that sometimes participants will have strategic reasons for the comments that they're making, which you don't know about. Okay, so they might be asking you something and they're not really bothered about the answer. They're trying to flag something up to somebody else in the room. So, if you don't really understand what's happening, just stay professional and leave it till the end. Now, diagrams and charts. People like well-organized, well-presented charts, but they must be fully annotated. They should be self-contained and understandable. Make sure that they're adding value to the narrative. Don't just put them in because you can. Don't put too many. And be careful that they could be controversial, so they may set people off, especially in a presentation. If you put a controversial slide up in the middle of a presentation, then you might trigger a discussion which you really don't want to happen at that point. So there's a good example of a really easy to understand chart. So keep it simple. People, as analysts, we enjoy making charts. We like data, but people, normal managers, are actually much more driven by meaning. Now, tables, people don't like tables much. They may be essential in a report or a presentation, but leave them out if they aren't. Split them into digestible portions. Keep them small. Again, titles, notes, and labels are important. They must be understandable without text. But put tables in appendices if you can, because they normally don't help with the narrative. Now, it's good to use pictures, I think, in a presentation or in a report, because it can set a tone, it can make a point. If you put people's photographs into your presentations, that can be nice. It can bring the project to life. I like to put, if we've had workshops with people from the organisation, I like to put photographs of that into presentations and reports, because it reminds people that things happened. People like to see themselves, and it just makes the project feel more real. You could also use pictures to make a point. So if you're trying to sort of make some fundamental point, then you might want to capture that in some kind of picture or metaphor, and that can work really well. You can also use jokes in a presentation. So here you can see an emergency telephone 174 kilometers ahead. It's not really going to be very useful. So it's sometimes nice to use jokes, but it doesn't always work. And if you're not sure, I would leave them out. Also, just be careful. Here's an example of a joke which makes me laugh, but it's not appropriate, is it? So you really shouldn't be making jokes like this in a formal presentation unless you know the people very well. So if in doubt, leave it out. It would be my advice. So common mistakes, presentations. So misreading the client's expectations. So wrong style, wrong tone, wrong content, wrong language, wrong timing, wrong message. No clear message, just lots and lots of information. I call this the bucket approach. Nobody likes it because it's just too difficult. No clear narrative, so we're not quite, the people are not quite sure what you're saying. Lack of preparation or rehearsal, so maybe you talk too long or you've got too many slides. Panic due to cock-ups, so especially when you're presenting live, if something goes wrong, like you can't get your computer to hook up to the presentation device, obviously then you start panicking. Once you've started panicking, it's very difficult then to present in a very relaxed way. Inability to cope with interruptions. So obviously if people start firing questions at you, that might sort of get you sort of ruffled. You might not be relaxed again. Or people may be deliberately trying to disrupt your presentation because they don't like what you're saying. Failure to establish a collaborative atmosphere. So maybe you're not sort of, sort of saying the right sorts of things and people don't like you or don't like what you're saying. Becoming too technical or academic, that can happen if you're doing analytics, or too much material to cover in the time is another big mistake. Now, in reports, very, very similar. Misreading the client expectations, no clear message, just lots of information, no narrative, poor executive summary, so it's just an introduction, poor introduction, so it's not setting the scene, hard to read main body, okay, so too technical or not enough signposting or unclear structure. Language inappropriate to client organization, too much technical content, hard to read appendices. So remember that just because you're putting something in an appendix, someone's going to have to read that appendix, so you need to make sure that it's still fairly easy to follow. And then the report becoming too long. So nobody likes reading reports, so keep them short. They don't need to be long normally. So finally, practice makes perfect. The more you give presentations, the better you get. I remember giving presentations on my master's course. They really were pretty poor. But obviously I've been lecturing for many, many years. I've got better. I'm probably not the best presenter in the world, but I'm a lot better than I used to be. Get feedback on your style. Get yourself videoed and have a look at it. It's pretty horrible. I remember the first time I was videoed presenting, I thought, oh my God, that's just awful. And it was pretty awful. But, at the end of the day, we all need to keep improving. That's an important part of being a professional, getting better. And, getting honest feedback on your style will help you improve. Remember, it's about careful communication first and foremost. Know what your message is and ensure there's a clear narrative. Clarity is everything with presentations. So tune into the culture of the client organization and make sure that what you're saying is appropriate. Okay, so that's some hints and tips about how to do presentations and reports. I hope you found that useful. Thanks a lot.